Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Hello, and welcome to Wi-Fi at Work. I'm Ellen Satterwhite, Vice President at the Glen Echo Group, and I'm thrilled you all have joined us for our second ever Wi-Fi at Work digital event hosted by WiFiForward. For those of you unfamiliar with us, WiFiForward is a coalition working to make spectrum available for unlicensed use and shared use for everything from Wi-Fi to Bluetooth to things that we do every day, from telemedicine to distance learning. This week, we're really excited to bring you a story of wireless spectrum innovation that is still taking place, but that started in the wake of the first closures from COVID-19 here in the United States. These are projects to bring emergency connectivity and capacity to Americans sheltering in place in communities throughout the country. So first, some housekeeping. For the sake of time, we won't be accepting questions during the webinar, but if you have questions for any of our speakers, please email us at info@wififorward.com, and we can connect you with the right people to help. We can also try and get some of those questions answered live if you email quickly. After the webinar, we'll be uploading video to YouTube, and we'll circulate it via email in case there's anything you've missed. So now let me introduce you to our esteemed guests and the topic. In March of this year, when COVID-19 caused most Americans to quarantine at home, the FCC was looking for ways to meet the unprecedented need for internet access, and fast. The Commission authorized special access for WISPs to use the 5.9 gigahertz band. This was meant to increase capacity for wireless internet service providers serving communities in 29 states across the country. The results were markedly improved connectivity in many hard-to-connect places. But you don't have to take my word for it, because we have with us many of the folks who were involved in these successful projects themselves. So I'll now turn things over to Louis Peraertz, Vice President of Policy at WISPA, the Wireless Internet Service Providers Association, who can share more background and introduce our panel. Louis, take it away.
Thank you, Ellen, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar, and thank you Glen Echo Group for sponsoring the event. So WISPA represents wireless ISPs, equipment manufacturers, consultants, and many other important entities in the fixed wireless industry that help the fixed wireless industry to thrive. We now have more than 1,000 members, more than 500 ISPs, and the fixed wireless networks depend on radio spectrum. So identifying spectrum and advocating before the FCC to allow them to allocate more spectrum so that most of our members can use it and quickly is key to the continued growth of the fixed wireless ecosystem. I should also point out that the vast majority of our members serve exurban and rural areas, and therefore they are critical to bridging the digital divide. And in December 2019, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, unanimously voted, all 5 members voted to propose to allocate 45 megahertz of unlicensed spectrum in the 5.9 gigahertz band. They also proposed to adopt the same technical rules and power limits for that 45 megahertz of spectrum that the Commission had already adopted for an adjacent spectrum band known as UNI 3. Now, for those like me who have to advocate before the FCC, we have to live with a whole bunch of not so great acronyms. UNI actually stands for Unlicensed National Information Infrastructure. And the new 45 megahertz of spectrum that the FCC is proposing to allocate would be called UNI 4. So the technical rules that the FCC proposed would provide for a large contiguous block of unlicensed spectrum between UNI 3 and UNI 4 that could accommodate either 2 80 megahertz channels or one 160 megahertz channel, which adds a tremendous amount of capacity to folks who use these bands. It also means, by having the technical rules be the same, it means that many of our members do not need to purchase new equipment to use it. For these reasons, WISPA strongly supports the FCC's proposal for the 5.9 gigahertz band. Now, as Ellen was mentioning, the value of this spectrum became dramatically apparent during the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic. A number of our ISP members experienced sharp increases in demand for their services due to the stay-at-home orders, which led to teleworking and distance learning. WISPA actually did a survey of 155 members. And what we saw in terms of their responses was that the average increase in traffic was 36% on the average member. And 83% of those that responded to the survey said that they were also adding subscribers. Now, fortunately, the FCC granted applications for special temporary authorities, or STAs, for our members to use the 5.9 gigahertz band to address this demand. We are hearing that from a number of our members that the FCC should extend these STAs because losing the spectrum would be disruptive to their consumers. Now today, 3 presidents of our ISP members have graciously agreed to take time away from their busy schedule to share with you how the STAs help them serve their communities during this national emergency. I am pleased to present to you Mike Kennedy of Intermax, Donald Dawson of TCC Networks, and Mark Radabaugh of Amplex. Mike will start us off.
Thanks, Louis. Brief introduction. It's a Chamber of Commerce day here in Coeur d'Alene. It's absolutely stunningly beautiful. And we're in the Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is nestled between Spokane, Washington, and Missoula, Montana. A gorgeous part of the country and a very topographically challenging part of the country when it comes to broadband. Many miles between towns, many, in some cases, miles between residences. And so we serve folks from the Canadian border down to a county south of us, about 150 to 180 miles, depending on how far we go. We have about 4,500 customers for our internet service providing part of the business. We also do voice and VoIP in the telecommunications side, and we do a number of corporate managed networks for their IT folks. Don and Mark are going to share a lot about the technology and things. I want to share a brief story. We are, in many ways, a bit of a Spokane, Washington is about 30 miles away. So we have many people who live in Idaho and work in Washington state. When the stay-at-home orders were issued in Washington, they were among the earliest states. Seattle was hit early, along with New York. And so their shutdowns began earlier than Idaho's did. And in fact, in some cases are still going on as we now feel a resurgence in the COVID numbers. There were 2 different individuals that I remember vividly going through. The first was an individual who lived in North Idaho and worked in Spokane, a prospect of ours who did not have bandwidth at his home. And as a result, we could not get him bandwidth. He was just in too rural an area. And he was unable to maintain his job because he couldn't work from home. He would have been able to had he had that spectrum. In another case, we had a person who, in similarly situated, a Washington State employee and a Idaho resident, and she was in an area that we have that saturation that Louis spoke about, enormous increase in bandwidth usage almost overnight. And she also had to work from home. And usually in our business, we balance it so that the business people use most of the spectrum or most of the bandwidth during the day, and residences use it at night. That script was flipped entirely. In getting the availability to do the STA, this particular woman had a very difficult bandwidth issue because we run into interference in the unlicensed spectrum. Louis talked about spectrum. In the unlicensed spectrum, there's other providers. We battle against various Internet of Things issues. And ultimately, the provision of the STAs and allowing us to go into 5.9 overnight improved our bandwidth, our throughput, and the latency. because we no longer had the interference problems of being in an unlicensed spectrum that was so heavily used and heavily saturated. So I'll stop there and we'll take questions later, but I really appreciate Ellen and the Glen Echo Group and the WiFiForward folks for putting this on and letting us speak to policymakers and interested parties. Thanks.
Okay, and next up will be Donald Dawson of TCC Networks.
Hi, folks. How y'all doing? I sound like I'm from Texas, but I'm up in New Hampshire. Thanks for Glen Echo Group and to Ellen and to Lewis and all you have done for this industry. We appreciate it very much. Yeah, so I'm Don Dawson. I run TCC Networks. We're alternatively known as Skywire up here, TCC Skywire as well. But we operate up in New Hampshire area in the north of the Lakes region of New Hampshire. We cover pretty much from about 1/3 of the top of New Hampshire, pretty much entirely, from Jefferson, Bethlehem, all the way up to the Canadian border, Pittsburgh, and Canaan, Vermont, and just about everything in between. I'm speaking from Errol at this point, Errol, New Hampshire, where we started our business here. We've been operating since 2005, where by necessity we built a WISPA in Errol, New Hampshire, to service about 40 or 50 customers when we had a vacation home up here and couldn't work from here to get any time up here while being able to cover work back home. So we ended up building a small WISP then, and we haven't looked back since. Sometimes we maybe wish we could, but we are well into this. We cover almost about 2,000 customers up here, and we, like most WISPA members and WISPs themselves, provide service to residents and businesses up here that are underserved and in many cases just unserved completely. We rely quite heavily on unlicensed spectrum to do so. We deploy primarily unlicensed 5 gigahertz equipment along with 24 gigahertz and 60 gigahertz products, both point-to-point and point-to-multipoint. We're dabbling a little bit in the 3.5 CBRS area, but the concern about the level of difficulty there is scaring us a bit. And what we are in great need for is additional unlicensed spectrum up here. What we were able to do with the STA we were allowed to gain access to is we had several links that were running that were capable of using that space once the manufacturer gave us the proper firmware for it. Pretty much once we got that firmware, we installed it on several links that were critical links, and they were certainly getting overwhelmed by the increased use from the pandemic. We also, during the pandemic, we made a decision to increase our first 3 plans by 5 megabits per second speed. So we went from a certain level to, we bumped everybody up just to help out our client base. And we certainly, felt that as well. And with the use of the STA space, we overnight were able to upload that to our probably about 7 or 8 major links that were backhaul links. And we saw about 150% out of those where they were 100% before. We saw a tremendous improvement in nice clean spectrum being used on those backhauls, which definitely resulted in more of the base that needed to use this bandwidth to get work from home done. To so many people were displaced out of their working environments, and we feel like that the STA license helped us greatly to deliver our services to quite a few more customers that were looking for bandwidth. They needed more, and we were able to provide more through getting a cleaner spectrum to deliver our backbone services on. So we were quite pleased about that. We're hoping that the powers that be can find a way to get us some more additional unlicensed spectrum that we could use to kind of almost immediately enhance what we do for so many customers that need our services up here. So we're very, very happy about the ability to have this temporary access. We're hoping that the FCC will continue to let us use the spectrum, and that's our goal is to continue with this business and grow out and bring additional bandwidth to customers throughout our footprint, and getting additional spectrum is critical to that. But thank you very much. I think I'm up on time.
Thank you, Mike and Don. Batting cleanup for us today is Mark Radabaugh of Amplex Internet out of Ohio.
Thanks, Lee. So yeah, we're in Northwest Ohio. We have a lovely 100-degree day today, I believe. Plenty steamy by the lakes. So our area, we cover about 2,500 square miles, and it's a mix of urban areas down to areas with 1 to 2 households per mile, depending on where you're at as you get outside into the countryside. We serve about 9,500 customers and roughly 2,500 square miles. Sorry, I probably should have looked at my notes since I'm repeating things here. A mix of wireless and fiber to service our customers. When Ohio enacted its stay-at-home order or shelter-in-place order, we saw roughly a 24% increase in the peak bandwidth. So the peak that occurs for us every night is at right around 10 p.m. That jumped instantly by about 24%. But even more interesting was the utilization during the daytime was probably up 50%. The peak wasn't a whole lot higher, but it was used much steadier. A lot more people utilizing it throughout the day. We tried to stay as an engineering and as a planning about 6 months ahead of where we expect growth to be. So our backhaul links have capacity, our APs have capacity. That was gone overnight. Just network went from, yep, we've got 6 months of headroom to where'd it go? Fortunately, the STA gave us a lot of breathing room on that. And our manufacturer, our vendor, we use Kennedy of Networks for a lot of things, did a very good job in working with us and the FCC and getting us software available very quickly that we could do an over-the-air software update, push to the customer radios, push to our equipment without leaving the office, without having to make truck rolls. So essentially instantly available once the FCC approved it and the vendor was able to roll that firmware out. Not only was the new spectrum very helpful in relieving congestion and interference on certain APs, what it also allowed us to do was take and widen channels on all the other access points. Because we had even more spectrum, we could use some of that new spectrum on certain access points, and we could take the spectrum we left behind on the old ones and use it to widen out channels to increase the capacity on that. Overall effect was we did not actually have a great deal of difficulty meeting demand due to the pandemic because of that STA spectrum. Without that, we would have had to build a lot of smaller cell sites and try to gain capacity by shrinking the radius around sites, deploying a lot of equipment. And that takes a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of energy, and just a lot of cost. But the biggest thing is we need a lot of time to do that, and we really did not have time on this. So that spectrum was incredibly helpful in meeting demand and letting people work at home, letting people continue to work. So greatly appreciated it.
Thank you, Mark. Turning it back over to Ellen.
Thank you all. I'm sure you saw me furiously scribbling notes because we've all spoken a little bit about college football, but also about what y'all are doing. But I'm learning new things as we talk. Both Mark and Don said something I think I heard that was very important that I want you all to focus on a little bit more. We're talking about firmware and software updates, right? The FCC approved the STAs, and then did you have to deploy new equipment, or what was? I just want to reiterate what that process was like.
For us, it was obtaining a new software load from our vendor, and then pushing that over the air out to all the client radios, and then installing it at the access point side. So it was entirely a software change for us, no new equipment needed.
And Don, what about you?
It was quite the same for us. We weren't quite as lucky as the Cambian folks were, but we were able to get our firmware, and we were appreciative of getting it from our manufacturer. Ubiquity handles much of our gear, or provides much of our gear. We were able to just upload firmware and do it at the right time in a maintenance window, and we came out the next day with, or even that night, we saw a clear improvement in pristine bandwidth we got to use. But we also then, because of that, we brought in a few additional links and went and built out several different links, because we knew we could get the kind of pristine throughput, or I should say clean spectrum, that we had available to us. So there was some build out involved, but that was, we could have just been benefited by what we did without build out, but we went a little further.
And sorry, Don, just one more question. Was the build out for additional customers, or were the links?
Well, yeah, it was both.
Yeah, okay.
Both. We built out additional links to serve existing customers where we saw capacity issues exceeding what was there, and it didn't have the ability to be flashed for that equipment. But for the most part, we had equipment in the air that we were able to quite rapidly get the benefit of this STA.
Great. Mike, I see you nodding. What was it like for you all? Oh, you're on mute.
Pardon me. Mark and Don answered it well. For us, the ability to help immediately and changing, like Don, we expanded our packages as best we could in the areas where we serve, and it was an overnight fix. Our tech guys, you know, I love working around geeks, and they were happier than a pizza and a Mountain Dew and a game console. It was phenomenal. So we really. I
was going to say something else. I really did.
No, I'd love to know what you thought, but we'll talk about that later. Yeah. So it was a same thing. We used a firmware update, and we did not need to install new applications. It was really quite a very simple, clean fix. And I've got to credit the manufacturers for that, who have worked with the FCC and been, you know, thinking forward about the need for building radios that have multiple spectrum capacity, so that we can make those changes on the fly when needed.
That's great. I think that's really important. The notion, and Mark talked about, you know, wanting to plan and be at least 6 months ahead in your own business, but what policymakers and companies throughout the value chain do and go through to ensure that they're ready for situations like this, that hopefully don't happen that often, but in the normal course of things, the collaboration seems to be critical and worked in this case, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The FCC's got a great proposal, and in it, just because of its ability to seamlessly fit onto existing spectrum. So makes it far more effective by not requiring a lot of investment in new equipment. It will, if it comes out, it will be used very, very quickly and very effectively.
That's a great point.
If the STA turns into a permanent situation.
Well, so I think that's an excellent transition. Having had the benefit of several months of use of this spectrum, and as companies and with WISPA, you have really been talking to the FCC for quite a long time about the potential value of increased unlicensed spectrum availability. What should the FCC be thinking about and taking away from this experiment?
Louis, I'm going to actually throw this a little bit back to you. I think there is an open proceeding just waiting for their decision on this reallocation of spectrum. So if you don't answer directly, I would say I think they should take out of this that they should definitely do what they have proposed.
Yes, and it's now been, you know, about 7 or 8 months since they proposed this, and WISPA strongly believes that the FCC should move quickly to order. While I did mention at the top that, you know, this proposal drew a unanimous decision from the FCC, there are opponents to the proposal, and the proponents largely come from the automobile industry. And what they've said a couple of things. One is that there could be harmful interference to their intelligent transportation systems. There are a number of parties such as Cable Labs that have refuted that study by demonstrating that using Uni-3 devices, that there is no material risk of harmful interference from adjacent channel Wi-Fi to ITS. The automobile manufacturers have also said that the FCC is really giving short shrift to transportation safety. WISPA believes that Congress has given the FCC authority to make line drawing decisions about spectrum allocation. Chairman Pai's policy proposal for the 5.9 gigahertz band recognizes the achievements in automobile transportation safety, such as the development of cellular to vehicle everything. And after a careful data-driven analysis of the use of the 5.9 gigahertz band, or the lack thereof, he has determined that 45 megahertz of unlicensed use and 30 megahertz of spectrum for intelligent transportation is the proper allocation of spectrum for this band. So we think that he's doing an admirable job of balancing both public safety goals, public interest goals, excuse me.
Yeah, Louis, I'll editorialize for just a minute. I think anyone familiar with WiForward and our members, which include WISPA, would know that we also think this is the chairman's proposal, supported by his colleagues on both sides of the aisle, is a win-win. That we can take a scarce resource and achieve some public safety goals and perhaps some technological innovation with C-V2X in addition to DSRC, while doing something that really makes use of the remaining 45 megahertz for broadband. I think what the folks on this call have done in a short period of time, just to show what is possible, is incredible. So I'm done with my editorializing.
Ellen, if I may, I just want to add to what Mark and Louis said. This is a nonpartisan issue. We have both Republican and Democratic members in the House and the Senate who represent all of these areas that it is in most need. And I've been very pleased by the amount of work and responsiveness of our policymakers. A lot of people want to beat up our policymakers, and sometimes, it's warranted, but oftentimes they're doing the right thing and they just need more information. So I really hope that the Congress supports allocating this 45 megahertz spectrum. And I hope we can have them encourage the FCC to quickly adopt that order, as my colleagues have suggested, because it's the right thing to do, and it really will make a big difference, is making a big difference. And unfortunately, the pandemic has not passed us. We are still in the midst of it. And frankly, it's changing the way people are thinking about whether they work, where they work, from home or office. And our business has been impacted by that too. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. I think that really succinctly puts it together. In the final minutes that we have, I know this is not the only piece of technological innovation that you all are looking at to help serve your customers and Americans who need access now more than ever. Is there anything else you'd like to share with policymakers about this experience, or technology or regulatory changes you're looking at in the future? Maybe Louis, I don't know if you want to weigh in first, or.
Happy to do that. So look, we normally, in DC Beltway, we normally live in a hyper-partisan political world, right? But as Mike was alluding to, and I mean, this issue at the FCC has united both sides of the aisle. Both Republican and Democrat FCC commissioners support allocating the 45 megahertz of unlicensed spectrum. I know that there are several congressional members from both sides of the aisle that are trying to develop legislative proposals to quickly help Americans stay connected and help broadband internet service providers, such as our fixed wireless industry, keep Americans connected. But probably encouraging the FCC to quickly adopt this proposal in a 5.9 gigahertz band is probably the fastest way to help all Americans. And I think the stories that we heard today from these three ISPs are just, really kind of underscore just how quickly this can happen. And so, we would ask congressional offices to encourage the FCC to move forward.
Thank you. Any final comments from folks?
I have one. I would like to publicly thank Steve Curran at Lerman Center for getting the ball rolling on these STA applications. He was immensely helpful in getting these to the FCC originally, and the help was greatly appreciated. And also to WiFiForward for putting this on. Thank you.
I would have to agree. Steve was instrumental in us getting this STA for sure, as well as other matters. And I know he's worked diligently, as well as we thank the Glen Echo Group and you, Ellen, and for putting this all together. If the FCC and our policymakers look at this closely, they would come up with they would have to come to the conclusion that if there is a way to safely and without harming other incumbents to give access to unlicensed spectrum to us operators, we certainly will not waste time making use of it. We will get out there and get our customers connected faster and reliably. And we hope that we can see some action that would give us some relief to these quite congested spectrum bands that we have to work in, given the fact that we're doing quite a lot of good in the country and beyond. But certainly in our country, we represent a pretty good chunk of folks that are getting bandwidth that would have no other place to get it. So we're hoping that more will happen and that we won't lose this spectrum for sure. But thank you all.
Well, on behalf of WiFiForward, thank you to Louis and WISPA for being such good partners. But I do want to again say thank you to Mike and Mark and Don. It is a pleasure to have presidents of ISPs talk about this and take time out of your days, which I know are spent thinking about what's next and keeping people connected. So we appreciate it, and thank you for your time, and thank you for all that you do. From us at WiFiForward, for everybody else, stay tuned and watch this space for Wi-Fi at Work, our ongoing series this summer. If there's something you'd like us to talk about or address, we would be happy to. So send me an email at esatterwhite@glenechogroup.com or info@wififorward.org. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.